A very good day to you and welcome to the program. I want to speak to you today about a gesture, a good gesture. You know, action speaks louder than words, doesn't it? A picture tells a story. And words, sometimes you've got to listen a bit more carefully. But when somebody does something, you don't ever forget it. It might be something terrible, like behaving like a lunatic on the road. You don't forget that incident. But also a good gesture you never forget. If we go to the Gospel of John chapter 13, and I'm just going to read a couple of verses starting in verse 4. Remember now the disciples were at the Last Supper. They must have been discussing who's going to be in charge and who's going to be here and who's going to be sitting next to the Lord in heaven and what's going to happen. And the Lord didn't say a word, not a word. He just got up. I'm talking about the Son of God. He just got up. And he put a towel around his waist, and he took up a basin of water, and he started to wash their dirty feet. God, Emmanuel, God with us, washing the feet of his own creation. Think about that for humility. Listen, here we go. I'm going to read from verse 4. And he rose from supper, and he laid aside his garments. He took a towel and he girded himself. Verse 5. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. A servant's heart. That's what you and I need to be doing. We need to act more and speak less. You know, I read the life story of the first president of the United States of America. His name was George Washington. And George Washington was actually a farmer, just like what we are. Very successful farmer. And then he got involved in the war, the Revolutionary War, where the United States of America broke away from Great Britain. And he was the general in charge. After the war, he could have made himself king. That's right, because in those days, it was all kings. He could have been the king of America. He said, no, I'm going back to my farm. So he humbled himself. King George III of England said he's never ever heard in his whole life of a man who's had a victory and then steps down. Amazing. He was on the farm and they called him back. They said all the other generals are arguing now about who's going to be holding what position in the government. And they were worried about a revolution taking place amongst the American generals. They say he stood about 6'3", is a very imposing person and loved by everybody. He walked up the aisle in this meeting. They were all sitting there, and he started to speak one of the most powerful speeches that have ever been written. When he was finished, these men still were not impressed. They were still argumentative. They were wanting to fight each other. And then you know what he did? He did something amazing. He did it unconsciously, I believe. A gesture. What did he do? He fumbled into his pocket and he pulled out a letter that somebody had given him, a piece of paper, and he unraveled the paper and he started to read it. But he was bumbling. He couldn't see the words too well. And then he had to take out a pair of wire-rimmed glasses and put them on his face. He was only 51 years old. And he said, this war has made me an old man. And I can't even see properly anymore. And with that, there was an absolute silence. And some of the generals started weeping. And with that, he walked out, and that's finished it. He had worn himself out for the sake of America. And here they were fighting about who was going to be the next president. I want to say to you today that sometimes a good gesture speaks louder than words. The other morning I got up early, it was cold. I made a fire in the wood stove in our house for Jill. That meant more to her than if I'd bought her an expensive gift. A good gesture. Goodbye.